All right. So as we get started, the first thing we want to talk about is the role of a fraud analyst. It's not like people can go to school. This is an undergraduate degree in risk management. So there's really important things that we at Riskified look for whenever we bring someone new on to the team. And as we think about the overarching role of an analyst, it's not just reviewing transactions and handling the manual review queue. It's far more in depth. It really comes to the translation of what human beings are seeing through the transaction patterns and translating that into our models and our machines so we can make better, smarter, more accurate decisions about how we look at transactions. An example of the research we would do is kind of being able to really spend the time understanding things like the decline rates of certain regions and how does that vary by a specific industry. Or we may look at population size or how fraud patterns are different in different cities across the US and take that into consideration as we're making automated decisions on transactions in the review process. So really our approach to kind of bringing in people to manage the team is far more holistic than just tactically reviewing the manual review queue. So for today, as mentioned in the beginning, we have a few goals of things I want to cover. The first is our primary goal, which is to provide you with our approach and your own tools so you can build and maximize value from your own individual risk team that you're building at your companies. So how we're going to do that, we're going to take you through 3 different areas. The first is how do you hire? Who do you look for? Who are the right fit of candidates to bring in to kind of handle this type of position? The second is how do you train them? How do you develop that risk management or fraud prevention domain expertise that, again, is not taught in school? And the third area is really about mastery. How do you continue to evolve that team that you have in place to optimize your own process and your own solution? So before going too deep into our approach, I want to tell you a little bit about who Riskified is. So we've been around as a company almost 3 years. And in that time, we have adopted a model. We've grown with over 2,000 merchants worldwide. But our model is pretty different and pretty simple. We take on the end-to-end, the full risk management process for online retailers in the sense that you tell us what orders you want us to review, and we get back to you with a yes or a no decision. And every decision we make is 100% guaranteed in the event of fraud. Myself, I am Andy Friedman. I'm the company's CMO. I've been with the company about a year and look forward to spending the next 30 minutes with you all. So just to give you a sense of how kind of risk analysts fit into our system and our model, as mentioned, we take whatever orders a merchant wants to send our way. That could be everything, 100% of the transactions, or it could be just the really risky stuff that your analysts aren't sure what to do with. Either way, we run it through our model. Our models are consistent of both machine learning models and algorithms, as well as, when needed, human beings, our analysts, to kind of review and tell the story on transactions to deliver that decision of approve or decline. And we've been fortunate enough to work across many different verticals. Some of these brands you may recognize, some of these categories I'm sure you can see as being highly correlated with high fraud incidents. And so we really have been able to stretch our solution across a number of core verticals and adapt our models and our analyst training accordingly for each of these types of environments. So with that, I'll jump right into kind of how do we approach the hiring process for Riskified on the analyst side. So the first thing that we really need to look for is the type of person. So again, I can't overemphasize when you're looking for a risk analyst, most likely you're not going to find someone who studied this in school or has deep experience. And we often see that as not the type of person that we're looking for in our model. We look for people who are very creative, who understand technology, who are naturally problem solvers and have a propensity for curiosity. Because ultimately this job is about kind of understanding and uncovering and digging around to tell the story of a transaction. The last thing any online retailer wants to do is reject or decline a transaction from a customer who could be legitimate or is legitimate because of the long-term effects that has on your business. But it's challenging because many orders do look like they could be fraud. mismatches and what have you. So what we want to do is make sure we're bringing in people who take that investigative approach and really spend the time to kind of implement analytical thinking to solve these problems. So what kind of experience are we looking for? Very diverse. We look for people who come from lots of different backgrounds. We have analysts on our team who have studied music, economics, computer science in university, or even practice that post-university in the professional world. And most often we bring in people who have limited to no fraud experience because we have a specific way that we want to evolve, and it's really around the type of person they are that is most important. So again, we're looking for top performers who really do have that propensity to kind of dig into problems and want to solve them. No matter what the background, we're confident that we can bring them up to speed on what we do. Oftentimes we hear from some of our merchants who have kind of shifted people over from customer support or other function in organization to take on the role of risk management, and that can make total sense as long as the core skill set of these people kind of follows the same suite of looking to solve problems, approaching things from an analytical perspective. Those are what's most important as we evaluate the talent we're bringing in. So what can we do in terms of bringing inside? So this is a question we get asked quite often. Is it better to bring someone in from another section of the company, someone who is currently handling customer support, someone who's currently in operations, who kind of is showing an interest in kind of getting into the risk world, or is it better to hire from the outside? There truly is no silver bullet to this. I think there's benefits to each type of these hires. So what's shown here is kind of some of the benefits of inside hires versus outside hires. Ultimately, you have to choose what's best for you, but it's looking at that underlying skill set of the individual to see what they can bring to the table. So whether they know your business inside and out, or whether they're really just coming at it with like an eagerness to learn, kind of have the same evaluation in place. And we'll talk to you about some of the tests that we put our analysts through in the hiring process. So last point on kind of the dimensions that we evaluate before diving into some of the actual tests that we provide. So I mentioned we're really looking for strong analytical thinking. Do they fit with the company, obviously, and can they do more than just review? So we put a lot of emphasis on research and development capabilities from our analytics team. So that could mean that they take on specific tasks that go outside of their core responsibility of reviewing transactions. And we'll talk about what some of those are. But really important that you're looking at evaluating candidates across multiple dimensions as you think about who you should bring in as you build and grow your team. So let's break these down a little bit. So the first kind of way we test is around how strong candidates are in terms of their analytical thinking. So when you think about what you're looking for, you're ultimately looking for people who can take lots of information, lots of different unique data points, and really uncover what's most relevant to tell the story. When you're looking at a transaction, there are hundreds of things that you can look at. The device that's being used, the IP that they're dialing in from, the item they bought, how much time they spent on the site, had they purchased before, the list goes on. But ultimately, you need to be able to quickly prioritize what is most important in telling the story. And tied to that is kind of being able to keep in your mind those same patterns and those same data stories as you look across hundreds and thousands of transactions so you can be more efficient in the way your review process is working. And the last is, and this is really about intuition, it's the ability to balance the way you are able to kind of derive information from the data and communicate that when making a decision on a transaction. Always remember that every decision you make in the manual review process, there's an end customer on the other line. That customer could be a fraudster, that customer could be legitimate, but you have to be able to come to that decision with the rationale to support why you're saying yes or no to the transaction. So intuition does play a big role in how you should be evaluating people. So a test that we often give candidates comes down to kind of really telling the story of a potential customer. So here, I'll walk you through two use cases that we like to kind of give. We usually give between 5 and 6 of these profiles of customers, kind of telling the backstory. Who is the person? What do they do? Where do they work? Where do they live? What is their family dynamic? And what kind of things are they most interested when they're online shopping? We usually will give a candidate about 10 minutes to digest and really retain the information from these profiles before moving to the next step. So what we're trying to understand is, are they able to anchor themselves in terms of the data points here that are most important? What is it about the venture capitalist that makes them most unique and specific when reviewing a transaction on your store? And so being able to pull in those most important data points is always the thing that you should be looking for and asking about when doing a test such as this. The next thing we would do in this test is we would supply them with a transaction sheet. Think of this as a credit card statement, which has several transactions that are varying in terms of the items and the transaction amounts that may be having. And what we're looking to do is see if the candidate can derive with rationale a match between the specific person and the types of items they're buying. Again, you're looking to see if your understanding of that individual is able to help you understand the types of things they would be most likely to purchase. And this is a very effective test at getting at how a customer would be able to come to your store and how the analyst would be able to evaluate them. So going back to the example we had, you can see here that, remember Eric, the venture capitalist, if you're able to prioritize the things that are most unique about that person, focus on technology, enjoys art, very fitness focused, and is a bachelor living in the city, you start to understand the types of patterns and the types of things they see in the end transaction receipt. So these things, can you be surprised at how challenging this can be when you're looking across a number of different profiles? But if you are able to find candidates who can anchor themselves, pull out the most important and relevant parts of the data to tell the story, it's a very good signal that they'll be able to take on the role of an analyst. So an important test for us. The next thing we test as a result to analytical testing is we actually give sample transactions. So no better way to understand if someone's up to the task than to put them in front of the model and let them see how they do. So better data is to use the information that you're looking with. So the way we approach their capacity here is we want to understand, okay, are they able to kind of understand what's happening in the transaction flow? Are they able to take that information to kind of build for further automation, as we discussed? And lastly, when presenting the story back to you, the interviewer, the hiring manager, are they able to explain their rationale and their decisioning in a simple manner, even though the underlying data points are very complex? So let's take an example here of a transaction that came through a ticketing site. So in this case, the merchant is Ticket King. They are a reseller of sports and entertainment tickets. And what we're trying to have the candidate do is explain whether this transaction is good or bad in any associated kind of signals in the order that would be relevant. So as you can see, Eric is the purchaser of this ticket. He's buying for someone named Mary. He lives in New York. She lives in Connecticut. All sorts of kind of rules-based ABS mismatch alerts are going off here. But what we want to understand is what's really happening. So when we start to dig into the information that's at their disposal and at your disposal as a merchant, you start to understand a little bit more. You can see that Eric is placing the transaction from a Bain Capital corporate IP. You can quickly defer that that's a legitimate, strong corporate IP. There's an explanation of why he'd be able to have this disposable income to purchase the tickets. And then you can also start to look at information about the timing. So if we look here, the date in the lower left of the ticket, you can see that the date is May 11th. And a simple scrape, pulling in information from Facebook or LinkedIn, would be able to tell you that there is a relationship between Eric and Mary. In fact, Mary is Eric's mother, and so mother-in-law, I apologize. And so he is able to the candidate's able to explain why this transaction is happening. So a lot of detail here, a lot of ways you could kind of tell the story. But what you want to avoid is finding candidates who are very quick to decline, because ultimately your business is in the interest of approving transactions that you can. So a great test to kind of look in and dig into those information. So the second dimension that we're looking for in the hiring process is their ability to kind of really take on more than just the reviewing of transactions. So research and development is a core part of how we build kind of our teams in-house, and we're looking for people who have a thirst for knowledge and a desire to kind of really share and grow, who bring new thinking. So if you recall, like in talking about like the qualities we're looking for, that natural sense of curiosity is critical to successful analyst teams. So how do we assess that? Really, sometimes it's as straightforward as asking questions. A very effective question that we ask every employee that comes through Riskified is about what was the last thing that you wanted to learn about, and how did you approach learning it? And that could be really something simple. How are the pyramids built? How does a digital camera work? How do planes fly? The basics. Really, it doesn't matter. But what we're looking for in the response is how do they approach tackling that question? Where do they turn to? And how can they explain the information they retained? Very effective at digging into the types of people that you're bringing into your organization. Another thing, and kind of an associated task, is kind of understanding how they can explain their rationale. When a good question to ask in the hiring process that we've seen with good degree is asking someone to explain something that they are experts in or are very good at, and how would they explain that to someone who's never done it before. So again, you get to learn a lot from this type of questioning. You understand not only who they are as a person and what their interests are, but also how they can explain and communicate, which is effective to understanding how they operate within your organization where collaboration is so critical. And the last thing I'll talk about in the hiring process is around organizational fit. Can't overstate how important it is to find people who really understand your business, your team, your corporate culture. Ultimately, as a risk manager, you are the gatekeeper to saying yes or no to every dollar that comes through your operation. The last resort, and having someone who really buys in to the vision, the model, and the way you do business is going to help you because that person is going to be more invested in the success of the company. So what we want to see here and what we look for at Riskified is for people who are really able to take an active and engaged role in making the system better. So again, everyone has been in another company before, most likely, or had other professional experiences. And what we want to look for is we want to look for tell me something that was wrong now. So we're not looking for a complaint session. We're not looking for people to vent. We're looking for people who can actually bring to us thoughtful, strategic answers to things that they saw. Maybe they weren't able to invoke that change. That doesn't matter. It's really about how do they tackle the problem and what did they see. And the second thing that's also helpful to look for when looking at fit is people who are able to connect with lots of people. Again, there's no simple question that can help you get at this. So what we do is often we bring in other people from other functions to get involved in the hiring and recruiting process for analysts. So that could be someone from my product team or someone from my sales and marketing team, or even someone from the finance team who's getting involved in just asking questions, seeing if there's a fit. Is this a person that you'd want to have a cup of coffee or a beer with after work? Really important just given the nature of the job that we're doing and how involved we are in the success of the company. So to wrap up the hiring section, hopefully this has given some decent food for thought, but want to make sure you understand kind of those three kind of core buckets we're looking at. So it's really about kind of the analytical skill set of the candidate. Who are they and how do they fit within your organization? We want to make sure we put into place enough testing that allows you to look apples to apples across candidates. It's really hard to do that, especially when there's limited background and experience most often within this type of role. So you need to make sure you can standardize how you're evaluating these candidates. And lastly, really important to get several pieces of data input from other people in the organization on how they think about the candidate and if they think it would be a good fit. Even if they don't have the deep understanding of the way you do risk management, they'll be able to tell you if the candidate himself or herself would be a good fit for your organization. So now you have a team. You've been able to bring them through the hiring process. Hopefully they're working out well, and what you want to do next is get them up to speed. So our approach to kind of training is pretty involved and robust, and we try to make it as effective and efficient as possible. So how we do that is we bring our new analysts in as classes, if you will. So we work to consolidate our hiring process to kind of understand and plan our needs, how many people we need for a specific period of time. And we want to make sure we can bring those people in at the same time if possible, just to make sure we're maximizing the onboarding process and the effectiveness of our resources that are going to be involved in training and supporting them. So we also see a side benefit outside of just being efficient with your time, which is that when you bring people in who are learning at the same time, it really does deliver more meaningful experiences, conversations, and a faster comprehension of some of the core topics that you'll be covering. And the last thing is that when you're building people, building a team, having kind of gone through a shared training experience together does create stronger bonds. In our experience, has led to far stronger retention and future success within the organization. So just some high-level thoughts on training before we break down exactly what our process is. So if there's interest from anyone on the call, we're happy to kind of take you through in more depth some of the things we cover in each of these sections. But ultimately, we look at kind of the initial onboarding period really in a 6-week process, with those first 2 weeks being all about the basics. So we really do assume that people are coming to the table with limited to no knowledge of risk management. Because even if there is background, we don't want to get into the trap where we're looking at legacy training and legacy thinking to inform your business, because your business is unique to you. And so what we like to cover in this 2-week period is kind of the basics of fraud. How do fraudsters operate? What are the various MOs? We want to make sure we can talk to them about the process. How do we review transactions? What are the unique things we see within our respective businesses? And then, how does the role of an analyst evolve over time? So really those 2 weeks are involved. It's a lot of reading, a lot of kind of little short kind of quizzes and testing on how they can retain information of different fraud patterns, ultimately just to get them up to speed as quickly as possible. Within that next period of time, the goal is really about fraud apprenticeship is what we call it, but it's kind of putting some of your more senior analysts hand in hand with your junior analysts to make sure they get practice. We're letting them get the experience of telling the story. So really, fraud story building is a big part of this next phase. And they're being able to shadow people who've been doing it at some time to understand and help them understand the tools we use and the stories we build. And really, in terms of mastery, I think that's a highly ambitious term, and no one should expect people to be masters of fraud management within a short period of time. But our goal is by the end of 12 months, ideally, even sooner, to have people completely efficient on their own, kind of really building the automation and the new tools that we put into place. So just to go a little bit deeper, this is a snapshot of one of our calendars that what would look like for those first period of time. So this was what we would call our fraud basic training, and some of the things we'd cover in a week 1 of that. So we break down the day, we talk about who we are, what we do. We really take them deep into the order flow to show them how a transaction is reviewed. We talk about other solutions, so we spend a lot of time talking about the marketplace, other solutions that are available, tools that we may use to optimize our own solution, all those things. And then over the course of the next 2 weeks, we really go deeper. We start talking about more technical things, our tech stack. How do we use things like proxy connections to tell a story of a fraud pattern? We look at different fraud MOs and how they vary by specific industry or vertical. A lot of different training sessions. We try to make these sessions as collaborative as possible so people can share and learn together. So what do we do in between? A big part of this is making sure that there's retention of the information. So we will provide written examination. We're testing the analysts in terms of how they're able to kind of retain information throughout the process. So we may do kind of a retention test at the end of day 2, another one at the end of week 1, and a third at the end of week 2 to see how they've been able to improve. Ultimately, we're looking for people to be able to deliver responses to our tests as quickly as possible, but more importantly, as accurately as possible before we feel comfortable with them getting to the next step and actually putting them in front of live transactions. Another thing that we find quite effective is getting them to review historical orders. So less risk, same story. So we will put them in front of 100 transactions, give them the decisions behind the scenes. First let them make the decisions on their own, then cross-check to see how they did. We have endless transactions at our disposal, so it's really critical that we can start to understand how they start to think about the transaction decisions they're making and the accuracy at which they're making those transactions. What this all means is that we are able to pretty quickly bring people in and get them up to speed in a fast and efficient way. Again, bringing these people in as cohorts, as classes, is really a good way to kind of make sure you're being efficient with your own limited resources, making sure you're training them along the way and assessing their development, and then leveraging other people and other things in the organization. You have a lot of people who know your system. Make sure you're looping them in and they feel like active participants and bringing new people up to speed, because not only is that always good to kind of refresh yourself as an experienced person on the team on what skills are you need to be learning, but it does develop better relationships with new people who are coming into your organization. So the last section I will cover is around mastery and automation. And this is something that we at Riskified take a lot of pride in. We are ultimately looking to build a constant feedback loop between what is happening on the manual review queue and how our models, our automation models, are making decisions. Ultimately, in our opinion, kind of looking at that low-level transaction data will only take you so far. So while even if you're able to manage and get your chargeback rates down, there's always that risk that you're being too conservative and leaving good money on the table. We believe in the power of kind of using what human beings are seeing on the back end to automate what's happening on the front end. It makes the entire operation far more efficient. So this is a visualization of what that constant feedback loop looks like, but analysts are far more effective if they're building and kind of contributing to the model, and there's so much historical data that you need to be taking advantage of, and we do on a constant basis because it really does help us in terms of prioritization. So to talk to you about what this flow can look like, I'll walk you through kind of the steps that we take as it comes to building new features and new systems into our automation models. So the first would be around identifying a trend. So perhaps we see that the domain age trends are identified as a strong indicator as fraud. So how long has the email that's being used been in existence? If it's just been created in the last couple of days, is there an explainable reason? But we want to make sure that analysts have the ability to look at that by domain, so the different domains, and also by time. And so we make sure we look at a research task. So this would be something that would actually be given to one of our analysts, and they'd look across a sample data set, significant sample data set, to assess the correlation here. They'd come back, they'd look at historical data, they'd be able to take in all these data points and build the business case that would tell us what the right way to evaluate the performance would be. The third thing we would do here is if there is this story, if we can validate that there is kind of reason to believe that domain age is strongly correlated with fraud, we'd want to build that into our model. So what that would mean is that if we're able to say with confidence that certain domain age for certain domains have a very, very low fraud incidence, we would make sure we automate those decisioning. So those types of transactions aren't coming into your queue, aren't wasting time, aren't bogging down your team. Ultimately, what we see when we're able to do this effectively is an uplift in our model performance and our coverage, meaning less orders to review by your manual review queue, meaning faster response times and better customer experience. So we can take you through specific examples if there's questions, but this is really something to look to. The last thing I will cover in terms of mastery is that we can't, tell you how important it is to be communicating internally. The worst thing that can happen in an organization is there's a nugget of good information kind of sitting with one of your analysts that isn't being kind of communicated very loudly. So we definitely adopt the megaphone strategy where we have a very open communication style. In fact, all of our analysts are sitting in what we would call the bullpen together. And so if they start to see patterns in different trends, they can talk to each other, they can share those learnings. So we're not losing time with redundancy and missing out on opportunities to be more efficient. The other thing is that you need to make sure you're setting up your team for success. Give them the tools, give them the flexibility, give them the ability to share their stories and their ideas. That's why you hired them, and that's where you need to bring them in. The last thing is make sure you're investing in your team. We see too often that fraud managers are feeling that their analysts aren't feeling like they're being compensated well enough, they're not getting trained well enough. Spend the time to talk to your team, understand what's important to them. It doesn't always have to be financial gain. Oftentimes, it's just getting more recognition, more exposure in the company that's very meaningful to people in this role. So make sure you're spending the time to build that into the way you're mentoring and nurturing your own internal teams. The last thing I'll talk about is just kind of wrapping this up with how we think about implementing this. So just to kind of leave you with a few parting words, our approach to building in risk analysts is really a 2.0 model. We like to think of the people we're hiring as very rough diamonds that we have the ability to shape. That gives us the ability to kind of really let them dictate how we should be growing and how we should be evolving our system, even though it's operating within you, the company. The second thing is about the people you hire. Take the time. We often hear from our customers that a sale's coming up or it's the holiday season. They feel rushed to bring people in, and they are not thinking about the quality of people bringing in because it's very short term. Our experiences would tell us that spending a little bit more time up front is a far better financial decision than kind of continually bringing in people who aren't invested in the success of the organization or the team. So we would highly advise you to kind of spend the time and the energy to make sure you're bringing in the right people. And the third thing in any element of business is about how do you execute. Make sure you're giving your analysts the tools, the time, and the resources to be able to be effective in their job. Always ask them for feedback because they're going to be able to see things that you can't always as a manager. And make sure, if you're an analyst on the call, make sure you're always bringing new ideas to your manager so you're not losing time and being inefficient. This is something that we take a lot of pride in. We're always interested in talking more about how we approach kind of the risk management process in addition to the hiring and training process for new analysts. So anytime you want to reach out with a question, my contact information is here. And I will end on that note and open it up for questions. Okay, I see one question in about where do you find analysts? Like if there's no one, you're saying don't hire from other companies that, where people have been analysts and there's no training for this in university, where do you find them? That's a really good question. I think what we've seen to be most effective is the way we write our job descriptions. We glamorize the job because we actually think it's quite a sexy position. You're an investigator, you're solving problems, and so it's the language we use. We try to make it seem as attractive as the job really is, in our opinion, and we put that out, across different channels. So whether it be LinkedIn or different job boards, there's organizations like the MRC, which has good job boards for posting, but I think it's more about the type of description you're putting into place. Turnover. So there's another question here about someone who says, we bring lots of people in, they don't stay long, and they end up leaving, so I have a kind of rotating door of fraud analysts, if I'm reading this question right. Totally understand that problem, and I think it's definitely more of an issue with people who kind of come in and aren't invested in the success of the company. The way we approach that, and we've seen analysts who come in and end up going on to kind of be full stack developers or salespeople at our organization even, and that's fine. because they've shown that they're invested in the company. I think it's worse if you're bringing people in who aren't invested in what you're building as an organization. And so I think there's no silver bullet here, but one thing that can help reduce churn on the employee side is making sure you're spending the time up front to make sure that people are coming to your job for the right reasons, not just for a paycheck. Okay, well, I don't see any other questions. I'll wait just a minute. But as always, please reach out to us with any questions. Really appreciate you taking the time to listen to our approach to kind of the hiring and training process for new analysts. And we welcome your feedback, so please reach out anytime. Thank you again and have a great rest of the day.